Welcome to On the Chain. This is Jeff here with co-host Chip. We have the original sponsor of the Token Taxonomy Act, Congressman Warren Davidson's here with us today.
Welcome to On the Chain.
Welcome to On the Chain. Great to have you here. Great to have you back.
Yeah, really nice to join you. Thanks for the invite. Love your show.
What's your thoughts on Gary Gensler as the chair of the SEC? Regulating by enforcement.
Yeah, I think it comes through. I'm not real happy with Gary Gensler.
What about Ethereum? Is Ethereum now a security?
We had this.
I heard your exchange. They've been in place since 2015. You say in your statements that there's clarity in the market and the rules are clear. Just come on in. You can't even answer the question.
And part of that exchange was highlighting that I'm working to, frankly, eliminate his role and restructure the SEC. I think Gary Gensler has undermined the SEC, and the solution is to restructure it and, frankly, go back to what it is supposed to be.
How do you approach when you have Senator Warren, we have Brad Sherman, who are leading this anti-crypto war?
Yeah, Republicans have not uniformly embraced it. I've got colleagues that are, probably as opposed to crypto in any form as Brad Sherman is. But as a party, broadly, the GOP in the House anyway has embraced it. There are Democrats who are at least in the same range as pro-crypto as I am. And the reality is Elizabeth Warren is really driving financial services in this space. She's amassed an enormous amount of power over this financial services space, and she's doing it without legislation. I mean, there hasn't been a single bill on any subject that's passed the Senate Banking Committee since December 5th of 2017.
How have things changed since you originally sponsored the Token Taxonomy Act? So if we go back, I think your original sponsor was 2018.
So we started networking to try to get on financial services. And so in January of 17, I became a member of that committee. And we had no focus on digital assets whatsoever. I started pushing to say, hey, we should actually have hearings on this. And if you remember in 17, that's when the ICO market was really hot. There were really cool use cases launching, but there was, frankly, just some really scammy crap that was going on out there. And it seemed like the SEC didn't know what to do about it. So it's like, why don't we have hearings? And we couldn't get hearings to speak of. As a junior member, you don't get to convene hearings. So that continued on into 2018, and we still had no hearing of substance on it. We had some meetings trying to explain to people what it was, but we didn't have full hearings. So I said, well, I can't necessarily have a hearing as a junior member, but I can have a meeting. So we said, let's get a group of people together at the Library of Congress and talk about it. And, the goal was to get, a dozen, maybe two dozen people together. And we had to cap it at 50, and people kept upping. Instead of sending a representative, they're like, well, hey, we'd like to get our general counsel. And then if this company, word was their general counsel was coming, well, we want to send our CEO. So it really came to be, I think 11 o'clock at night, the night before the meeting in September, my staff guy for financial services was getting calls from people that felt really threatened. If you don't get my CEO in there, just all kinds of stuff.
It seems like Chair Gensler and the blue team seem to be on the complete opposite side. I mean, are we reading it wrong? In the beginning, you had mentioned there's members out there, and I remember Darren Soto was there co-sponsoring the bill with you. We just don't hear from them, and it seems like the entire initiative of this administration, to Chair Gensler, to Elizabeth Warren, they just want to dismantle blockchain and crypto and push all that innovation offshore.
I think they don't really want to push it offshore. They fundamentally want to kill it. And look, that's not everyone in the party, but everyone in the party seems to be going along with it at some level. I still have co-sponsors, but it's been, for new legislation, like Keep Your Coins Act, we haven't found a lot of enthusiasm for it.
So what are some of the potential risks with this CBDCs, the central bank digital currency in the U.S.?
But the Biden administration is working on all this stuff. I mean, and not just any version of central bank digital currency, the same creepy surveillance state version China's doing. So without saying, gosh, we really envy the power of the Chinese Communist Party, they were essentially saying that. And, thankfully, not the whole party is there, but that's where a lot of the leadership of the Biden administration is. I mean, no one made Joe Biden nominate Omarova to be the communist banker in charge of the Office of Controller of Currency. That would have been a 180-degree difference from Brian Brooks, who was using that office, I think, rightly to provide some clarity, for things in that regulatory sphere of the OCC.
How would you look at, and is there a possibility that we're going to see a shakeup of the unelected bureaucrats from the SEC to the EPA and beyond?
Yeah, I think the real risk when you look, why has the, really bureaucracy, not just under one president or the other, but decided that they can just front run everybody. And I think that's what you see with Gary Gensler. He knows he doesn't really have the authority to do a lot of things, and he's just acting. Recently out of the Supreme Court was West Virginia versus the EPA, and the EPA decided that they wanted to start regulating carbon output. And, they made it clear, well, you don't actually have a law that says you should regulate carbon output. So your clean power plan idea is halted. It's stayed. You can't continue to move forward with enforcement on that. And the reality is the EPA is continuing to impose a lot of those standards that were drafted under the Clean Power Plan. So we haven't even fully resolved the implications of that specific to the EPA. But if you look at the logical conclusion of that for all these agencies, you do need legislation before you can act. But that hasn't stopped bureaucrats in a number of cases from just trying to move forward without it. The bill that we're drafting eliminates the role of chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission. So if we could pass that, there would be no role for Gary Gensler to show up to. He would be fired, not in a personalized sort of way. It's just, well, this job doesn't exist anymore, so stop coming here. And then you would make him ineligible to be hired by the Securities and Exchange Commission. No former director could be hired for the role. But the commissioners would go to parity, and that's what works on the Federal Election Commission. It keeps it collaborative. No one really tries to game it. If they need a law, they push for a law. They don't just, and that's where I looked at, I think the securities laws in the country should be politically neutral. There shouldn't be some radical agenda that one party or the other is trying to push into our capital markets. I mean, we've got a very mature set of capital markets, but there's a big void because some of the laws are very dated and hard to apply. And, there's a lot of pressure, frankly, on the Securities and Exchange Commission or others to act. And the real failure is Congress. Congress needs to pass the law. And a lot of times Congress doesn't want to. They don't want the responsibility or accountability. They want all the praise when everything works right, but they don't want any of the blame. And they don't want to cast recorded votes a lot of times. So I think if you get a neutral commission, it makes it clear if you really want a major position, you need to come to Congress and put pressure on Congress to act. And I think some of the frustration directed at Jay Clayton and Gary Gensler really should be directed to Congress, because we could solve all this if we just passed a law that made it clear.
We just had Rep. Patrick McHenry said in the House Financial Services Committee he's going to meet with the Agriculture panel jointly in May to work on this crypto legislation. What does that look like?
Yeah, I certainly hope that we move forward with that. I think that'll be one of the components. We're trying to deal with the whole market structure in this hearing and with legislation. So token taxonomy would be one of the components of that. Before you regulate an exchange, you would want to be clear what is actually supposed to be on the exchange, what is a security, what is not. If you look at why is the House Financial Services Committee working with ag, most people would think of the Commodities Future Trading Commissions as a financial services organization. Nevertheless, ag is the committee that has jurisdiction over the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, because ag has commodities. But so does energy, and it's not in the Energy Committee. So it's sacred. It can't be changed. I've tried hard since I've been there because it would be rational. I think it's really good work by Chairman McHenry to get and Chairman Thompson, GT Thompson, to get together and say, let's come up with one framework. It will be a little more tedious to kind of get to consensus, but I think to your point, once we get there, that ultimately did happen for the internet area in the 1996 Telecommunications Act. But that's also been hard to touch after it's passed. So
what do you believe that the blockchain tech and crypto how can you combine this technology to actually improve government operation, transparency, and accountability at the government level?
Yeah, if you look at the concept of blockchain, so many people are focused on it as a payment system because, Bitcoin initially started as a permissionless peer-to-peer payment system. If you look at all the use cases that the underlying architecture of blockchain inspire, I mean, we're well into the internet era and we haven't even remotely tapped all the use cases yet. I think blockchain's similar. If you think about the idea of doing accounting in a blockchain sort of way, where there's a ledger that is unalterable and immutable distributed ledger. Think about the auditability. Every agency would be able to pass an audit. Now that scares the Department of Defense to death because they can't pass an audit. But some of them, that's why they like the central bank digital currency system, because you could link it to a social credit system and truly make everything manipulative. You could use it for coercion and control.
If you expand on that just one step further and you take it to one person, one vote, we obviously have some major issues within our voting infrastructure at many different levels, and every state, has different timing and how they actually count the votes. Florida, we're both Chip and I are fortunate to be in the great state of Florida, where they report as soon as the voting is done. They report the count. What about one person, one vote, put all voting on the blockchain?
I love the idea, and I think the way that we could do it, and there's a guy from Delaware, I'm drawing a blank on his name, that really has written, thoroughly on this about corporate governance and using distributed ledger technology to do proxy votes. So get the shareholder votes instead of, there's two proxy advisory firms that dominate. So how's our capital markets so controlled? Most people don't vote their shares, and so these proxy advisors are voting on behalf of all the shareholders a lot of times. And frankly, neither of them is controlled by an American corporation. They're one's Deutsche Börse and one's Canadian. But nevertheless, you look at the vulnerability for votes or votes to be avoided just in shares. I think if we can prove this out in a major way in another forum, we could get it into the election system. I really, if you look at the underlying technology, you would have instantaneous real-time auditability. The same people that oppose voter ID would be even more opposed to an idea that you have an immutable distributed ledger that can show the record of who voted and where they voted, how they voted, and everything.
Do you think we will see an appetite to actually audit the Federal Reserve?
There is growing support for the Audit the Fed bill. I think Thomas Massie carries the bill in the House. Ron Paul made it famous with both Audit the Fed and in the Fed, and Massie's focused on auditing it. I've got a bill that would build on the audit of the Fed, and it pulls the regulatory component of the Federal Reserve, the body that just denied a charter a Fed account to Custodia Bank, as an example, pull them out of the Federal Reserve system directly and put them into, you can call it still the Federal Reserve if you want, but you put them on appropriations. And then there would be clear accountability for every dollar that they get. They would be just like any other bank regulator in that sense. But if you look at even the monetary policy, we had conversations with the Federal Reserve, with Chairman Powell back in 2020, and there were lots of us who were opposed to closing the economy. Nevertheless, it got closed. I created the Sound Money Caucus in July of 2020 and say, this is really a problem, what you're doing, please stop, and it is going to cause inflation. And of course they said, no, it won't cause inflation. I said, it will. And they're like, well, okay, but it won't hit consumers. They're like, it will. And they're like, okay, but it'll be transitory. It's not going to be transitory. No one's even pretending anymore. These people know the implications of it. You have a PhD in economics. I have an MBA. I know, if I know, they know. They've created a whole phrase around this on the left with, Bernie Sanders, economic advisor, wrote a book called Modern Monetary Theory. And it's the idea that you can just print more money. Well, yeah, you can print more money, but it doesn't guarantee that you can buy the same amount of stuff with the money. That's what historically we've called inflation. You call it whatever you want, but it's wrecking our economy.
I know we're at time. I know Zoberhead said, thank you, Congressman, for your service and all the great things you're doing inside of Congress, really pushing forward to benefit the American people on the baseline as far as what it looks like for crypto. Again, I still think the crypto taxonomy really needs to be dusted off. And never got out, it never even made it in a committee. It never got a voting committee. So I think it's time to at least dust that off, and let's take another good look at that. Jeff, I'll let you know the word, and then we.
Yeah, appreciate, Congressman, appreciate you coming on with us again. It's always a pleasure having you here with us. Great to hear updates in terms of what you're working on, and hopefully, to see some real positives coming out of Congress going into the next season.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. And just think of the progress from when I talked about initially trying to get to the point of the Token Taxonomy Act to now we have a digital assets subcommittee. So we've made real progress. Chairwoman Maxine Waters, when she was chair, created a task force that started looking into it, and Chairman McHenry created a whole subcommittee on it. So I think there's a meaningful support from Congress to get something done on this. I do hope we have a coming together of something that'll really continue to build momentum for our markets.
Yeah, we're looking forward to 2024. And we know we're going to have great outcomes, and we'll see some great legislation actually being passed right through to the president at that point.
Yeah, let's hope. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Take care.
Appreciate you.